This podcast is brought to you by TrophySnack.com.
Welcome to another episode of the AI Analysis Podcast. Today we're looking at a political episode of the Average Intelligence Podcast.
That's right. We watched a pretty interesting solo special he put out recently. The whole premise was him outlining 5 specific compromises.
Yeah, things he thinks someone like Donald Trump could, lead on or at least facilitate.
Exactly. And the goal he set out was, well, pretty ambitious. Using these compromises to maybe become seen as one of the greatest presidents by tackling these big divisive issues.
And he was really upfront about it, wasn't he? Saying these were his ideas, things he'd been mulling over for a while.
Definitely. Not just random thoughts. He presented them as like actual workable policies.
And then he had that line telling politicians, Trump included, to just steal this shit, which, kind of sets a tone.
It does. Part serious policy proposal, part provocative challenge, maybe.
Yeah. And the timing was interesting, too. He mentioned recording it right after that news about the Department of Education and student loans dropped.
Right. That was the direct trigger for his first compromise idea.
Okay, so let's dig into these 5 proposals. He kicked things off with student loans, which is, constantly in the news.
Yeah, he jumped right on that development where the Department of Education told loan servicers, okay, if someone's in default like 270 days behind, send them to collections. That was the specific thing he was reacting to.
But he made a really important clarification right away.
Crucial point, yeah. He stressed this wasn't some brand new harsh policy. It was actually just things going back to how they were before COVID hit back in 2020.
So the pause on payments, the interest freeze, not sending people to collections, that all started under Trump because of the pandemic.
Exactly. Trump initiated it, Biden extended it multiple times, and after, almost 5 years? This news was just the end of that temporary relief. Back to the old rules.
That context is key, because you could easily see headlines making it sound like a sudden crackdown.
Right. He felt that was being missed. It wasn't a new policy, it was the old policy restarting. Which then leads to the debate, is that old policy fair, especially now?
Okay, so before his actual compromise, he kind of surveyed the landscape of the debate.
He did. He laid out the standard conservative argument first.
Yeah.
You're 18, you sign a contract, you know there's interest, you got to pay it back, personal responsibility.
The bedrock argument against forgiveness, basically.
Yeah.
You made a deal.
But then he immediately pivoted to the counter-arguments, the things that make it more complicated in his view. He brought up predatory lending, which is a whole can of worms itself.
And he really hammered on the societal pressure aspect, called it almost brainwashing.
Yeah, that was a strong word he used, particularly for, his generation. This idea that if you don't go to college, you're, he said a fucking loser, that you basically wouldn't succeed.
That's intense pressure for an 18-year-old making a huge financial decision.
Absolutely. And he contrasted that pressure with the reality many grads face. You borrow a ton of money. He used an $80,000 example, assuming you'll get a good job in your field.
And then the job market is tough, or the pay in your chosen field just doesn't match the debt load.
Precisely. He gave that example, taking out $80,000 to become a social worker. But the average starting pay he mentioned was maybe around $28,000 a year. You just can't make those numbers work easily.
It makes repayment incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and he questioned the guidance, or lack thereof, in high school. Were counselors really talking about fields with good earning potential versus the cost? Or was it just fill out the FAFSAs, get the loans, go to college?
He even speculated, admitted he had no proof, but wondered if there were incentives for counselors based on FAFSA completions. Just a suspicion born of frustration, it sounded like.
It points to this feeling of a systemic issue, right? Pushing kids towards debt without maybe full exploring alternatives or giving realistic financial counseling.
Okay, so that's the setup. What's his big compromise idea, the one he thinks everyone could actually get behind?
It's pretty straightforward, conceptually. The federal government forgives only the interest on federal student loans.
Okay, just the interest, not the original amount borrowed.
Exactly. The principal balance, you still have to pay that back. That's non-negotiable in his plan.
And the logic is that this helps people who've maybe already paid back more than they originally borrowed because of interest.
That's a huge part of it. He argued it provides massive relief, especially for those borrowers, and he framed the government earning interest as immoral, suggesting the government shouldn't be profiting off these loans, particularly given how people were pushed into them.
That's a powerful framing, calling it government profit.
It definitely shifts the perspective, makes it sound less like a standard loan term and more like, well, exploitation.
But then the inevitable question, what about people who already struggled and paid everything off, interest included? How is that fair to them?
He had an answer for that. He proposed a tax credit for anyone who has already fully paid off their federal student loans.
How much of a credit?
He threw out a figure of up to $10,000. He said, smarter people could figure out the exact scaling, maybe based on how much you originally borrowed or paid in interest.
So a tangible reward for those who fulfilled their original obligation. It acknowledges their effort.
Exactly. It's trying to balance relief for current borrowers with fairness for past borrowers. And from the government side, he argued, they aren't technically losing the principal, just future interest revenue and the cost of the tax credits. He seemed really convinced this was a solid, workable compromise.
Interesting. Trying to thread that needle between relief and responsibility. Okay, proposal number 2, voter ID. Always a contentious one.
Definitely. And here he said up front, he leans a little bit more right on this one. He strongly believes you should need a valid photo ID to vote.
Like a driver's license, passport, that sort of thing.
Yeah, or a state-issued photo ID card. And not just for voting in person, but also for requesting a mail-in ballot.
Okay, so that's his starting point. But he did acknowledge the concerns from the other side, right?
He did. He specifically mentioned the arguments you often hear from the left, that requiring ID could be a barrier, especially for people who might find it hard to get one or afford one, potentially disenfranchising them.
So how does his compromise address those concerns?
This is the core of it. He proposes that states be required to make state-issued photo IDs available immediately, right there at the license branch, the BMV or DMV.
Available immediately and the cost.
Free. Absolutely no charge. That's designed to completely remove the cost barrier argument.
So you still need to go there, show your documents, birth certificate, social security card, proof of address, the usual stuff. But once verified, you get a free photo ID printed on the spot.
That's the idea. He said the technology exists. It's doable.
And he suggested a lead time for this.
Yeah, he said, roll it out now, give people plenty of time, maybe over a year, before it actually becomes mandatory for voting, like before the midterms.
What about people who have trouble getting to a DMV? Transportation issues.
He addressed that too. Argued that with over a year's notice, people could figure it out, get a ride from family, friends, use ride sharing, maybe community groups could help organize trips. He felt a year was enough time to solve those logistics.
And his underlying reason for wanting ID in the first place?
Election integrity. He went back to historical examples, stuff from the 1800s, documented cases of voter fraud.
Like what?
He mentioned things like people being driven around to vote multiple times, even stories of guys having their beards shaved off after voting once so they wouldn't be recognized voting again elsewhere.
Oh, wow. Okay, so he sees photo ID as the simplest way to prevent that kind of thing today.
Pretty much. His argument is that requiring a photo ID is the most straightforward way to ensure one person, one vote.
So the power of his compromise, in his view, is that it takes away the main practical objections. Free IDs available everywhere, plenty of time to get one.
Exactly. His challenge, essentially, is if we make IDs free and easily accessible, what legitimate reason is left to oppose requiring them for voting?
He was pretty blunt about that, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Saying if states still objected after that.
Yeah. He said then, it's pretty obvious they're trying to cheat. He framed it as removing all valid excuses, leaving only, in his view, potentially nefarious motives for opposition.
It definitely puts opponents in a corner, argumentatively. Okay, let's take a quick break.
Sounds good.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor. All right, we're back. We've covered student loans and voter ID. Next up, the third proposal tackled what everyone agrees is a huge, complex beast: immigration reform.
Yeah, he acknowledged that right off the bat. So many different facets, so much history tied up in it.
Where did he start? Border security?
Predictably, yeah. He doubled down on his support for a border wall, argued simply that walls work.
Yeah, meaning they completely stop everyone.
No, not that they're impenetrable. His point was more basic. Compared to just walking across an open field, a wall slows people down. It's an obstacle. He felt arguments against their effectiveness were disingenuous or missed the basic physics of it.
But he wasn't just about the wall, right? He had criticisms, too.
He did. And this was interesting. He expressed real disappointment with the Trump administration on other immigration stuff, specifically how incredibly difficult the legal way is. He thinks a lot of Republicans just don't get how hard it is, or they simplify it like, oh, just get in line, without fixing the line itself.
That frustration seemed key to his overall approach.
Yeah, it fuels his push for a total overhaul. So his compromise package has bits for everyone, trying to streamline the whole mess.
Okay, let's break it down. What were the parts aimed more at, say, the Republican side?
Okay, first, obviously, the fully funded wall. Second, temporary residence facilities near the border. And he stressed, not detention centers. He described them like efficiency apartments, places offering some dignity where people crossing illegally or seeking asylum or refugees could stay while their cases are processed, background checks done, etc.
What's the practical advantage there?
Well, if people are housed there, he argued, it makes deportations easier and quicker if someone gets a removal order or loses their asylum case. You know where they are. Plus, it might alleviate overcrowding elsewhere.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Anything else on that side?
Yeah, tougher penalties for trafficking drugs, humans, any illegal stuff, terrorism across any U.S. border, not just the South, targeting the criminal organizations.
Okay, so wall, temporary housing, tougher penalties. What about the overhaul part, the middle ground?
This was the big one, a complete rewrite of immigration laws. The goal, make the legal process simpler. He kept saying simpler, not necessarily easier. Streamlined for people wanting to live and work here permanently or temporarily once they pass background checks and pay fees, file paperwork.
So a more efficient legal path running alongside faster processing for illegal entry?
That seemed to be the idea. Make the legal way clearer and faster and also adjudicate the illegal cases faster.
Did he get into the weeds on things like birthright citizenship?
He touched on it, mostly to say arguing about changing the 14th Amendment via executive action is pointless. Supreme Court precedent is clear. A president can't just do that. He seemed to view it as a distraction from reforms that are possible through Congress and the executive branch.
Focus on what's achievable. Okay, what about the elements leaning more towards the liberal side? He admitted he leans that way on immigration, right?
He did, while still trying to be realistic about problems. So, first big thing. Citizenship for all DACA recipients. He briefly mentioned the criteria, applying, entering young, being here a long time, just a clear path for them.
Okay, what else?
Amending temporary protected status, TPS. He explained how TPS works, granted for specific countries facing disaster or war, requires application, background check, gives protection from deportation and a work permit, but no path to permanency.
Right, it gets reviewed every 18 months or so.
Exactly, his change.
Yeah.
If a country's TPS gets renewed more than 3 times, the people covered should get a pathway to apply for a green card, permanent residency. It gives people stuck in limbo for years, a potential way forward.
A path out of that temporary status eventually. Makes sense.
Then, making it simpler, there's that word again, to start the legal immigration process right at a port of entry.
How would that work?
He pictured someone arriving, stating their intent to live work legally, and getting the needed forms and info right there, instead of only being able to start the process from consulates abroad. He admitted smarter people would design the details, but the concept was key.
And he connected this back to the wall, interestingly.
Yeah, his argument was kind of counterintuitive. If a wall secures the areas between ports of entry, you could actually open more ports of entry, creating more places for people to legally apply, more controlled access points.
Interesting logic. Secure the gaps, expand the doors.
Kinda, yeah. And finally, expanding temporary work visa programs, like for seasonal farm workers who come for 6-9 months.
Make those easier to get.
Yeah, maybe a small fee, like $100, possibly taken from their pay. He saw tons of benefits. Revenue for the government, fills labor shortages here, helps workers earn more to send home. He seemed genuinely baffled why this is so controversial.
So it's a really comprehensive package. Wall, enforcement, easier legal paths, solutions for DACA and TPS, more temporary workers.
It's huge. It touches almost every aspect. He knows it's complicated, needs Congress, needs executive action, involves untangling decades of laws. But that was his vision for a grand compromise.
Definitely ambitious. Okay, moving to the fourth proposal, another really tough one. transgender athletes in sports.
Yeah, he stepped right into that one too, acknowledged how heated it gets, especially about trans women in women's sports.
What was his take? Did he pick a side?
He tried to be nuanced, said he understands both perspectives. He personally leans towards the view that, yes, biological males generally retain physical advantages post-puberty that can make competition unfair in many women's sports, particularly strength or combat sports.
What was that?
But he also said he fully understands and respects a transgender person's desire to compete as their identified gender. He gets the inclusion argument.
So how do you square that circle? Where did he find inspiration for a compromise?
This was unexpected. Professional wrestling.
Wrestling, seriously.
Seriously. Specifically, New Japan Pro Wrestling, NJPW. He explained they treat it more like a sport, with weight classes junior heavyweights under 205, heavyweights over 205.
Okay.
But sometimes they wanted, say, a popular junior heavyweight star to fight a heavyweight. To allow that without messing up the weight classes entirely, they created a special title, the Never Open Weight Championship.
Open weight, meaning anyone can compete for it.
Exactly. For that specific title, a 170-pound guy could wrestle a 220-pound guy. It created an open category just for those matches.
Ah, I see where this is going. He wants to apply that open idea to other sports.
Precisely. His compromise is to create open weight or open league divisions.
And who competes in those?
Anyone. Men, women, transgender individuals, non-binary folks. Whoever wants to compete in that division can.
Is there a catch?
One key element.
Hmm.
Transparency. He believes competitors in the open league should disclose relevant data, maybe biological sex, hormone levels, whatever's pertinent to the sport. An open book, basically.
What's the benefit?
Well, primarily, it gives trans athletes a clear place to compete without disrupting the traditional male-female categories that are the source of the debate. It also allows any cis woman who wants to challenge herself against potentially different physical profiles to do so, and maybe it creates interesting new matchups.
Did he mention specific examples or related issues?
Yeah, he brought up that Olympic boxer who people thought was trans, but was actually a cis woman with naturally high testosterone. Shows biological complexity exists anyway. Mentioned very tall cis women, too. And he specifically named Ilea Thomas as someone who could compete in an open swimming division.
What about the argument that some people might transition just for competitive advantage? The sort of thing parodied in that Lady Ballers movie or South Park.
He acknowledged that critique exists, but argued his open division solves it by providing a separate, transparent space. It doesn't force changes on the existing male-female divisions, it just adds another option.
It tries to offer inclusion without fundamentally altering the categories people are fighting over.
That seems to be the goal. Now, he did get sidetracked a bit back into wrestling.
Oh,
He talked about Nyla Rose, a trans woman wrestler in AEW. He finds the online hate she gets for competing in the women's division bizarre, especially since, 1, it's fake, and 2, she's not even the biggest woman on their roster.
Compared it to what?
Compared it to independent wrestling, where sometimes you see intergender matches, men wrestling women physically in choreographed spots. He showed a clip basically saying, it's weird fans accept that fictional violence but lose their minds over a trans woman in a different fictional match. He felt the logic was totally inconsistent there. Just an aside, highlighting perceived hypocrisy in that specific sphere, but it related back to his point about finding logical solutions for actual competition.
Right. Let's get to the final proposal, number 5. Tackling the big one, the national debt.
Yeah, the Everest of policy problems.
Yeah.
He started by saying, look, no president fixes this alone. It needs huge cooperation with Congress.
And his first idea for tackling it was unconventional, to say the least.
Oh, yeah. He admitted it sounds like a joke, but insisted he was serious. Politicians fight pay-per-views.
Wait, what? Politicians fighting each other?
Yep. Voluntary combat sports matches. Politicians, maybe celebrities too, different styles, MMA, boxing, jiu-jitsu, whatever they agree on. Like one championship, he said.
And how does this help the debt?
The pay-per-views would be expensive, like $100 or $200 a pop. And all the profits go directly to paying down the national debt. He figured if they were popular, it could actually make a dent.
Did he suggest any matchups?
He threw out some provocative ones. AOC versus Marjorie Taylor Greene, J.D. Vance versus Hakeem Jeffries. Even brought up the Elon Musk versus Mark Zuckerberg idea again.
Wow. Okay. Why does he think this is a compromise?
He framed it as letting politicians put up or shut up, settle things physically instead of just talking. And maybe, just maybe, it would make them tone down the trash talk in Congress if they knew they might have to back it up.
Did he think it would actually happen?
Nah, he was realistic. Said politicians would probably never do it because losing would be politically devastating. but he clearly wished they would.
It definitely says something about the level of political frustration out there.
It really does. A sign of desperation for something different, maybe.
Maybe. Okay, after that.
Yeah.
Slightly less serious idea? Did he have a more conventional one?
He did. He said, okay, let's be serious now. His second idea, privatize Social Security.
Yeah, it's been debated forever. What was his specific angle?
The key compromise element for him was structuring it. So Congress absolutely cannot borrow from the individual accounts. That addresses a huge fear people have about privatization.
So individual accounts invested in?
Securities, index funds, the stock market, basically. His argument was that retirees would make way more money because it's their money growing with the market, not just relying on the current system's payouts.
And how does that help the government or the debt?
The government would charge a small fee for managing these accounts, like a broker fee on a 401k. That fee creates revenue for the government, stops them needing to borrow from the Social Security Trust Fund, which adds to the debt, and could help pay down the debt or fund other things.
So it's aimed at boosting individual retirement savings and fixing the government's financial relationship with Social Security.
That's the idea. A market-based solution for individuals with safeguards against government meddling and a new revenue stream for the government itself. More of a standard policy debate there.
Okay, so those are the 5. Student loan interest forgiveness with a tax credit for past payers. Free, accessible voter IDs required for voting. A massive immigration overhaul mixing security, legal streamlining and specific paths, an open league for trans athletes, and then the debt reduction through politician fights and privatized Social Security.
Quite a list. And you see the pattern, right?
Okay.
Trying to find that middle ground, acknowledging different sides, aiming for something where maybe nobody's thrilled, but everyone gets something.
He talked about that explicitly near the end. The nature of compromise, meaning you don't get everything you want.
Yeah, though he did feel his student loan and voter ID ideas were maybe exceptions, where both sides should be happy if they were rational, in his view.
But despite laying out all these potential solutions, he didn't sound optimistic about them actually happening.
No, he ended on a pretty down note about that. Said politicians seem to have lost the art of compromise, and he didn't really see it coming back anytime soon.
It's a weird contrast, isn't it? Spending all that time detailing these intricate compromises, then saying you don't think the system can handle compromise anymore.
It really is. It highlights that gap between, having ideas on paper and the political reality of actually getting them implemented. The will, the negotiation, the give and take. That's the hard part.
Definitely. Well, thank you for tuning in and exploring these ideas with us. Hopefully it gives you some food for thought about compromise, political discourse, and the people who engage in it.
We choose to go to the moon, investigate, and do the other things.
Weird.
You know, someone said that frickin' Panera's Pepsi's taste funny.
Better.
No, I mean,
What?